Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I just wanted to do a video talking about some of the books that I've recently read, just kind of like walk through and talk about what I enjoyed and yeah, what I've just been thinking about and reflecting upon. Also, happy June. I always feel like June is just one of the best months because usually I feel like it's associated with the end of school and the start of summer, but then also, we have Father's Day, summer solstice, so the days are getting way longer, and we have Juneteenth, and then also Pride. So I feel like it's just also a very cheerful, positive month, and there's a lot to celebrate. Um, but yeah, other than that, let's just get right into it. Oh, one thing that I did want to say is, so I think in my last video, I had mentioned potentially doing like a London meetup. So I did just want to apologize because I never ended up doing that London meetup. There were some logistical challenges that ended up preventing me from being able to host the event. I really wanted to do it at this bookshop called New Beacon Books, kind of near Finsbury Park, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So I just wanted to apologize, and hopefully in the future, next time that I'm in London, I'll be able to do an event, and I'll be a little bit more strategic about how I'm planning it. But yeah, I am sorry for anyone that was looking forward to that. Um, but yeah, never mind that. Let's get into the video and let's talk about some books and what's been on my mind recently. Okay, so the first book that I'd like to talk about is this one here called The Worlds I See, and it's written by Professor and Dr. Fei-Fei Li, who is a professor of computer science at Stanford University. He's a previous director of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, which is basically one of probably the top laboratory for artificial intelligence, and kind of was started up around the same time as the field of artificial intelligence was actually like emerging. I think she's currently the director of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, which she co-founded and created, basically trying to like steer the direction of AI research to be humanity-focused and human-centered, obviously by the name. But she's kind of like known in the AI community as one of the leaders, visionaries, and one of the initial, I guess, like scientists that really proposed the idea of using large-scale data sets in order to train AI algorithms to learn. So truly, truly one of the sort of modern foundational thinkers in the field of AI. And she's also just like super badass, is a woman of color, obviously is a professor at Stanford. She is also the founder of this nonprofit called AI for All, which actually came onto my radar actually a few years ago. But it's essentially a nonprofit to give access to AI education, AI research to high school girls, but also underrepresented students and students of color, basically to give those students access to give those students opportunities to access university level research in high school. So yeah, she's just sort of a badass in the field of AI, in a field that's obviously dominated by a lot of white men. She's just I don't know, like a queen. But this book is actually really special to me, or Dr. Fei-Fei Li is actually really special to me because a few years ago, before I did my master's, I actually really wanted to do research under her, and I had applied to do. I actually had really wanted to do research under her because I'd heard about her through her initiatives for AI for All, and I was really interested about combating bias in AI and just people who were doing research on a more humanistic and more human-centered approach in artificial intelligence. So she kind of came onto my radar, like I want to say like 4 years ago, and yeah, it was already sort of like one of the people that I was really looking up to in the field. And for those that don't know, I currently work in AI. I work as a product manager on a data science and AI team at an edtech company, and I studied computer science and in school, in grad school. So she not only came into my radar as a leader in the field from a technical sense and the research that she's done, but also in what motivates her and how she approaches her research with this like socially conscious lens, which I think is oftentimes quite rare in the field, and is just generally quite rare in STEM as a whole. So when I found out that she had written this book, I actually didn't find out about it until a friend introduced it to me. I think it probably came out like last year, I want to say in 2023, but immediately recognized the name and was just so excited to read it. And it's essentially this sort of like memoir that kind of talks through her story of growing up in China, and then moving to the United States when she was about 15, falling in love with physics, she has this like incredible sort of like incredible intellectual curiosity about the natural world, which then led her to go study physics, and then kind of goes through her sort of like academic journey, and kind of like her work during the AI winter, sort of before there was all this like press and attention, and the focus was on AI, and when it was kind of more just like a small sort of niche academic field, kind of like not really underground, but just like wasn't, obviously at the same level of like recognition as it is today, with the latest technologies. So with this book, honestly, I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive, just because it is quite dear to me, the field of AI, but also Dr. Fei-Fei Li. So I thought maybe what I'd do is I'd kind of like walk through just like what the book is about, kind of just give a overall overview of the overall structure, then talk about some of the things that really stood out to me. Obviously, Dr. Fei-Fei Li is first-generation immigrant. I mean, I'm a second-generation immigrant, but I think there's a lot of parallels in her story that probably a lot of other first or second generation immigrants that might be watching this can also relate to. Then obviously she's also a leader in the field of AI that, I have like an intrinsic curiosity in. It's the field that I work in, but also just as a woman of color, as someone who's very like human oriented, approaches technology from this very like humanistic approach, and I think it's just has been an incredible role model for me throughout the years. And obviously I really wanted to do research with her. When I was applying to grad school, ended up deciding to go on a different path, but if I had had the opportunity, I would have absolutely loved to work under her and potentially be one of her graduate students. But anyway, let's actually get into the book and talk a little bit more about it. So I thought what might be best is to just kind of like talk about what the book is about, understand what she's sort of putting forward, and then maybe talk about the things that I really liked, the things that really stood out to me, and the things that I could really relate to, because it was honestly, I just like really enjoyed it. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of parallels, I think, with her experience. She moved from China to New Jersey. New Jersey is my home state. Her sort of like traversing different educational institutions. I think there were a lot of parallels there. And then also, obviously, her experience of being an immigrant, and specifically being a person of color in a field that is mostly dominated by white men. But overall, I'll kind of just like talk a little bit about like what the book is about. So it first starts off with her testifying, with her on her way to it first starts out with her on her way to testify in front of the House Committee on Science and Technology and also Space. And she's sort of talking about her journey in AI and her thoughts about the future. And I guess the main takeaway is that she sort of starts the book talking about how the future of AI sort of lies beyond sort of the science itself and the academic research, but instead it's also going to rely on other institutions that are then going to shape and mold the future of the technology, and most importantly sort of shape it towards this human-oriented path where we're thinking about it from the lens of education, but also activism and the role that government is going to have in regulating, but also in making sure that this technology is sort of steered in the right direction. So that's sort of like how she starts off the book, and she sort of like really focuses us on this idea that AI, yes, it has sort of like come out and evolved out of the academic realm, but really the future of it lies beyond the academic realm. It relies on all of us sort of like understanding and all of us sort of like understanding and feeling the sense of responsibility for how it moves forward, particularly us, and like the we as in us as like people in the field of AI, people in government, people in activism, understanding AI and understanding how it really needs to be a human-centered technology where we're thinking about how it is serving humanity and serving humans and serving people before we're thinking about how it can be used, obviously for profit in the private sector, but also before we're even thinking about advancing it as a technology. We're always considering it from this sort of like human-centered approach. So that's kind of like how she starts off the book. And so from there, she kind of just like walks us through the memoir of her life, of growing up in Chengdu, China, of growing up with her parents and her grandparents, her dad, who is this sort of like child in an adult's body with an insatiable curiosity and a love for the world and the ability to sort of extract joy from very simple interactions from sort of like anywhere. She tells the story of how her dad was actually late to her birth because he was he was bird watching and he lost track of time, and her name actually Fei-Fei, I believe, means to fly, and so that little like slip up from her dad was actually the inspiration for her name. And her dad's sort of like wit and wordplay and that sort of like childlike personality. Then she also talks about like the influence of her mom who has this sort of like more stoic intellectualism about her, and her mom who sort of like feels she's never able to really realize her full like potential in the academic and in intellectual setting because of the more like sexist norms that she encounters generationally, but also I guess like culturally in Chengdu, China. And so she grows up with this sense of feeling like almost like an outsider, where both of her parents, her dad who maybe has a little bit more of like a carefree, less focused on responsibility personality, and then her mom who sort of feels a bit like an outcast, who doesn't really care about these sort of like social norms and all the emphasis on respecting elders and all of that, and who feels really like she's been repressed because she hasn't she's been discouraged from from really pursuing her intellectual desires throughout her life. And so she takes from her parents this feeling of sort of like being an outsider, and this sort of like family that is sort of marked by this feeling of being like an outsider or sort of like on the border, feeling like they've lost faith in the institutions around them, and sort of like kind of in some ways almost like acting like in defiance to the societal norms around them. And so very early on from this chapter, we get the understanding, and it's like clear to the reader that this is like a family that is different. This is a family that sort of like stands outside of the societal and like cultural norms of the environment in Chengdu, China that they're actually growing up in. And then from there, we're first introduced to Fei-Fei's real like passions, and we find that she really finds herself in education. She develops this really strong love for physics, for the natural world, and she has this curiosity that in some ways I was honestly kind of like jealous of, just because I feel like for me growing up, I would say that I more found myself in sports, in the arts, maybe in creativity, and I wish that I had the same appreciation for education, the same appreciation for the natural world that that Fei-Fei had when she was a child, because it's clear that she's someone who really is very bookish, who is absorbing literature, but also just has this curiosity about the world around her, about how things work, about physics, about the natural world, about biology, about evolution. And when you read a story about someone like that, it kind of just, I don't know, it makes you wonder about what it would be like if you had some of those traits when you were a child. I'm very grateful for very grateful, because I think I throughout the last few years, I think I've then like reclaimed and sort of like reignited that curiosity in myself. But yeah, it does make me wonder if I had that same like academic and curiosity about the world when I was younger. But yeah, I mean, it's just very, very fascinating to read it from her perspective. And so she sort of excels, struggles at times, but sort of excels in her like STEM classes, in the STEM domains, but also has this very specific interest in literature and in reading the Western classics, but also in Chinese classics. So we get this sort of like full picture of her as someone who is who's sort of like feeling like a bit of an outsider who's kind of like a part of this family where they feel like they've sort of lost faith in the institutions. They kind of feel like they're almost like rebellious, or kind of like a bit defiant, but also very, very intelligent, and people who have like almost like insatiable curiosities. And from there, we get into her experience of moving to New Jersey. Her dad decides to move the family to the United States, just chasing opportunity. Obviously, there's this sentiment and this feeling of being outsiders in Chengdu, China. So when the opportunity comes for them to move west, they grasp at it, and kind of walks through some of the challenges. Obviously, the experience of moving to America and not speaking English fluently, like in high school, comes with its obvious challenges. Okay, camera died, but we're okay now. And so the next part of the book then kind of walks through her university experience, where she's studying physics as an undergraduate at Princeton, but then also starts to get exposed to the study of the brain, which then builds upon this sort of intellectual, or this sort of curiosity that she had about the natural world. I think that this is really where things really start getting interesting, because this is when she's first introduced to artificial intelligence as a field. She kind of walks us through the landscape, and so that's I would say as great of a memoir that it is, it's also kind of just a walkthrough through the landscape of artificial intelligence and how all these different subdomains within it, computer vision, machine learning, expert systems, how all these different domains sort of come together and have evolved over the course of time. So I would absolutely just recommend the book already, because obviously I have a tremendous amount of respect and awe in Dr. Fei-Fei Li, but also I think just even if someone was interested in learning about the history of AI and how it's sort of evolved as a field, this is a great book to get a walkthrough that is just enough technical complexity for someone who's maybe new to the field to be able to understand it. And obviously it's coming from one of the leading visionaries and leading scientists, so her ability to distill that technical complexity into very easy to digest words is just phenomenal. But she kind of walks us through the history of AI, how it kind of starts off with this conjecture that if we can describe human intelligence through rules and guidelines, what's preventing us from being able to take those same rules and guidelines and apply them to machine to then train machines to be intelligent. It sort of starts off in the 1950s with that sort of conjecture where a bunch of scientists sort of come together, and they come together at this workshop at Dartmouth, and sort of come together and sort of decide and try to see if they can make any progress on this sort of question. And so she kind of walks us through the history. She walks us through the approach of more rules and guidelines based approaches in artificial intelligence to then algorithms that are more sort of mimicking the brain of a child. So rather than trying to define a set of rules and guidelines for an algorithm to follow, instead, why don't we treat that algorithm as sort of a child, or treat that algorithm the same way that a child might navigate the world, sort of learning from his or her experiences or their experiences. And she really just kind of walks us through. But I think the most important thing to kind of grasp here is the nature of the field is incredibly interdisciplinary, and that it starts off with sort of a lot of math, starts off with people with backgrounds in physics and mathematics and electrical engineering, but then real progress in the field was only really able to be attained because of research that was being done in these other domains, in the study of the brain, in neuroscience, in cognitive science, and in psychology, and in the work that was being done to understand how we as humans actually perceive the outside world. And so it was only once we were able to then take those learnings from these other domains and apply them to how we're thinking about instructing and teaching these machines and computers to become more intelligent. That was only when we were able to then make these huge leaps and bounds and advances and just progress in the field of artificial intelligence as a whole. And I know I'm kind of talking at quite a high level, and in the book she gets into much more detail about the actual specifics of how the field kind of progresses. But for me, one of the biggest takeaways was her emphasis on this sort of interdisciplinary learning, or maybe not her emphasis, but what became clear from how the field has progressed is this sort of emphasis on interdisciplinary learning, and how the sort of guiding principle throughout her world is the ways in which humans perceive the world around them, the ways in which we sense the world around us, and how we then take that sensory information and process it in the brain, and all of that understanding, that rich understanding of all the physical and biological processes that are happening there, are actually what sets the basis and what informs how we then train and apply that sort of like intelligence to machines. And so it's this, really, I don't know, very simple phenomenon of using biology and our understanding of humans to inform other domains and disciplines. And obviously that, that's like something that we see all the time, where we're taking inspiration from nature in order to inform how we're building things in an engineering sense. But I think it's just, a reminder that of like how like incredible it is to be human, how incredible our like sensory awareness is, how incredible our ability to perceive is. So specifically, Fei-Fei becomes completely like enamored and interested in the field of like vision. So specifically like how we're able to perceive the world around us through our eyes and through the lens and the retina and all that. And I think, what really stood out to me here is that specifically about the sort of like evolution of photosensitivity and the ability to like recognize light and the ability to see the world. And she talks about how, just like the power of vision as like a fundamental sense, and how much we're able to garner about the world around us just through this, like, I don't know, through the lens of vision, how much we're able to pick up on scenes, how much we're able to understand about the world around us simply because we're able to see. And that sort of like makes it this like, the most, if not the most, one of the most, if not the, probably the most powerful, sense that we have is our ability to digest what's going on in the world around us simply through the lens of, pun intended, of vision. And then she talks about how the brain sort of evolves as a reaction to these like sensory inputs in order to be able to, process and understand all of the sensory information that we are ingesting and internalizing. Also, obviously, also from ears and touch and all that, but specifically from all the visual information that we're taking in every second or every millisecond. And she talks about the brain being the sort of like reaction, and the reason why it's the most sophisticated object in the universe, and that it's evolved in this tremendous way where it's able to completely function based off of the calories that we eat each day, a few veggies, some fruit, some carbs, some protein, and the brain is able to do these like incredibly like miraculous operations because of how it's evolved as a reaction to the sensory inputs that we evolved to, I guess, take in, that we evolved to absorb as a result of the need to understand the world, or as a result of evolving to better understand the world around us. And I mean, I think it's already pretty clear, but I think just her fascination for the natural world, her fascination for just kind of like seeing things from such a high level, of seeing the intersection of biology, cognitive sciences, even like psychology, with this like very then, I don't know, technical mathematical domain of computer science, and sort of seeing the intersections there and using what she's learning and her interest and curiosity about the natural world to then inform what she's doing in the technological world. I just found that really inspiring, and like I said, it made me want to continue to build up and bolster this sort of like curiosity that I have about the world around us, and about like, just like the I don't know, living and existing, and how much our bodies are able to sense about the world around us when we just choose to pay attention to the information that we're sensing. And so she talks about the brain and vision in this way that I just think really transformed the way that so I think she just talks about the brain, and particularly our sense of vision, and the sort of relation and the link between those two, with so much depth and coherence and awe, that it then inspired so much awe in me, and just made me feel this deep sense of like humility about how like incredibly complex our bodies are, and how incredibly complex our brains and our abilities to perceive and our perception of the world around us is. And I just think it was so, especially her points about how because essentially, what she's talking about is this idea that, the brain is painting the brain is painting the landscape of the world around us with such, fluidity and depth and richness and vibrancy all the time. But most of the time we're not really paying attention to it. Most of the time we're sort of like that, like vibrancy, the depth of the sensory information that the brain is processing is, we're just not paying attention to it. We're not paying attention to how, vision then becomes this sort of like cascade of experience, not only in terms of all the information that the brain is able to process, but also, I guess maybe more from like a psychological lens of all of the experiences that are then triggered from the visual information that we are seeing. So for example, the fact that when I see a laptop or a computer, if I pay attention to really the cascading experience that happens, it's probably bringing me back to a lot of other experiences that I've obviously centered around having a laptop. I don't know, maybe shopping in an Apple store, or like labs in school, or if I'm paying attention, or and maybe I see a familiar face, all of a sudden that's then creating this cascade of experiences that are reminding me of previous experiences that I might have had with that person that I recognized. I don't know, it was just such a I think in a world where I spend most of my time, very deep in the weeds of, data science, technology, manipulating, working with data, it was just such a treat and such a wonderful exercise to then take a step away and think about how the technology that I work with was actually developed, influenced, and inspired from how we operate in the natural world and how our brain operates in the natural world. And so to me, I just think that anyone that reads this book will just come away with it with a greater appreciation for our ability to navigate and to perceive the world around us. And to me, it was just, I don't know, clearly I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I just thought, I don't know, I think the relation between the brain, vision, senses, artificial intelligence, how we can then take our understanding of how the world, how we perceive the world to then inform how we're teaching machines to be intelligent, it was just incredible to me. Absolutely incredible. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. What else do I want to talk about? Yeah, so I think she's sort of like setting the, she's sort of at the forefront of sort of like leading, or of being like a scientist in this sort of like idea of using, how we're perceiving the world to then inform how we're teaching machines to be intelligent. And the rest of the book kind of like continues to go on, and she does a lot of her research in as a professor, and when she's in grad school, constructing these extremely large data sets where she is trying to create, I guess, like a data set of all the different like categories and all the different just basically trying to create a data set that is representative of human experience by taking, I think, 22,000 different categories and then taking thousands of different images within each category. So for example, one category might be a car or a cup, and then she might have like 1,000 of categories, thousands of images within each category to basically try and like replicate digitally the world, having a digital representation of the world using images. So she trains this algorithm, or she constructs this data set, which then leads to really profound and astonishing advances in overall the field of artificial intelligence, because again, using those sort of algorithms that I mentioned earlier that are teaching, that are learning sort of like a child is. So rather than using rules and rather than like someone deliberately stating specific rules and guidelines for the algorithm to follow, instead the algorithm is sort of like learning on its own, sort of in the same way that a child might learn as it's sort of like navigating the world. And so with this huge data set that is like representative of human experience, there are then researchers were then, that Dr. Fei-Fei Li constructed, researchers were then applying these sorts of like more childlike algorithms, which were then able to lead to huge advances in the field of AI and really like help us get to where we are now. So without her work, we would not be ChatGPT would not exist. All these advances that we have now, GPT-4, transformers, all of that technical jargon would not exist without the work that she done in understanding the power of data at scale and understanding the power of giving computers some sort of representation of the world at large and teaching computers how to perceive the world in a similar way to how we as humans perceive the world. So if it's not clear already, she is incredibly influential in the field of artificial intelligence, is one of the leading scientists and visionaries to, the world of artificial intelligence, the societal change that we're all going to be a part of, moving forward. And I just thought it was an incredible book. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the book starts off with this approach of human-centered artificial intelligence when she's talking at this congressional hearing and testifying, and is talking about how the role of artificial intelligence needs to go beyond, or the future of artificial intelligence needs to lie beyond, the realm of science, but instead needs to also be shaped by educational institutions, activists, government that are sort of regulating and shaping it in order for the technology to be used to serve humans rather than to harm humans. And so she, at the same time that she's, making these huge bounds and leaps within the field of artificial intelligence, she also then comes to a point where she is really advocating for this human-centered, humanistic approach, which I just think is, it's just amazing. You don't always see that in the field. You don't always see that, and you don't always see that by like leading researchers and leading technologists that are willing to address these, challenges of bias and, the ways in which artificial intelligence and these technologies can be maladaptive and harmful and even in some cases dangerous or, deadly. So I just think overall, like, the book was such a tremendous experience to read. I think if you're interested in the immigrant experience and someone who sort of finds themselves through education and through curiosity, this book is for you. If you're interested in learning about academia, about the life of a graduate student, of being a graduate student and the sort of risk and the difficulties and sort of the rewards of being on that path, this book is for you. If you're interested about artificial intelligence, about the landscape of how the field came to be and sort of the work that had been done in the past to then lead us to the point where we are now, this book is for you. But also if you're just someone who's interested about how technology can be used to help and serve humans, this book is also for you. So yeah, just really, really love this book. I think it's something that I'll come back towards. Obviously, as I mentioned before, I already had a lot of respect and looked to Dr. Fei-Fei Li as a tremendous role model in the past. And so when I found out that this book had come out, I already sort of had like a predisposition to to really enjoying it. But yeah, I just thought it was really fantastic and just really, really loved it. So I did have two other books that I wanted to talk about, but honestly, I feel like I've already talked about this book for an hour, so maybe I'll just super quickly talk about them. But I did also read this book by Alan Carr called The Easyway to Stop Smoking. And it's kind of like more of like a psychology book, how to stop any sort of like bad behaviors or like addictions that one might have. And I found this book to be really, really helpful. And just like thinking about like addictions and sort of like bad behaviors that one might want to quit but might have, sort of like addictive tendencies, because of the way he sort of like structures the approach of stopping that behavior. And he sort of starts from this approach of, rather than just like trying to quit through willpower, he talks about trying to sort of like understand why we're doing that behavior and how that behavior is serving us, which obviously makes sense, right? If you want to quit a behavior, it makes sense to understand like why you're doing it rather than just trying to like stop doing it. Like if I'm eating cookies all the time and I just try and quit, say one day that I'm gonna quit eating cookies, it's probably not gonna work as well as if I try and understand, okay, well, why am I eating cookies all the time? And then maybe take away that desire to eat cookies all the time, right? Because maybe that desire to eat cookies all the time is because I'm not eating enough food earlier in the day. And so by asking myself and sort of introspecting and trying to figure out, okay, well, why am I eating cookies all the time? I can then actually just like take away the desire to eat cookies all the time by eating food earlier in the day. And that way I don't have to kind of use willpower. So that's kind of like the framework that Alan Carr kind of like talks about. And I think it's just a powerful testament to trying to approach things that we want to improve upon, and I guess make more adaptive, or transform maladaptive behaviors that we might have into more adaptive behaviors, by going through the lens of understanding and trying to understand why those behaviors exist, and the desires behind them, rather than trying to quit things through willpower and brute force. And yeah, I just thought, it's just really, really helpful. And I think that's like, obviously, is something that applies to kind of like all sort of like behaviors that one might want to quit or lessen, or bring into greater balance. So yeah, really would recommend it. I think the lessons here extrapolate to much more than just the act of like smoking itself. And then the other book that I also read was Fourth Wing. Honestly, I don't really have too much to say about this book. I am not a big I haven't read a lot of like romance fantasy, so this was like my first like introduction into the genre. And I mean, I did read it pretty quickly. I was pretty hooked. Do I wish that the characters were more diverse? Like, absolutely. Do I feel like there was like opportunities to have, I don't know, much more diverse cast, and not have not have all the characters feel like they were like white, or like Eurocentric? Yes. But also, I mean, I did kind of like finish the book really quickly, and I did like it, so I thought that it was like pretty well written. I did think that it was a bit curious that she chose to kind of like make the main character really kind of like overpowered, and have like, I don't know, to me it seemed to be a book about a character who is, to me it seemed to be like a book that is trying to sort of like share the experience of someone who is quite frail and has like physical difficulties, and how that person can still come out and be really like still like a really strong character. It did just kind of feel like maybe the way to do that wasn't to then make that character like incredibly overpowered. I don't know, but I did enjoy the book, and I thought that I mean, it really hooked me, and I just enjoy like reading about dragons and fantasy and mystery worlds and all of that stuff. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series, but yeah, I did enjoy it, and I finished it in about a week. Yeah, I wish I could say more, but I finished it like 2 months ago, so I should have recorded this video earlier. But yeah, those are the 3 books that I've read recently. Obviously, I spent a lot more time reading The Worlds I See by Dr. Fei-Fei Li. Obviously, also The Worlds I See is really a clever title, because the whole book is about artificial intelligence and vision, and the relationship between vision and the brain, how that has informed like the evolution of the field of artificial intelligence. But it's also about her like little experiences of growing up in Chengdu, China, and then also moving to Princeton, New Jersey, and then the work that she's done at Stanford. So it's also literally about the worlds that she sees and the worlds that she's traversed through, while at the same time being about the worlds that she sees in terms of like vision and the importance of vision, and the work that she's done in computer vision. Very, very clever. Obviously, I'm like a very big fan. I think I nerded out a bit too much in this in this video, but I hope I hope people enjoyed. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.